Well, with week 8 in the books, we can all breathe a collective sigh of relief as scoring has returned to the NFL. And that just means more fun for everyone involved. It's more fun for the NFL, it's more fun for fantasy players. Things are just better when people are scoring a lot of points. So, have a massive stud section I've got to break down, see how that projects to the future, and this is sustainable. So, as always, hit that like button, subscribe. This will be our first week on Sleeper. So, I'll keep you updated on that. It's going to be a very exciting update for the channel. And with that being said, let's cue the intro. All is right with the world now that scoring has returned to the NFL, and as we mentioned in the intro, this just makes it so much more fun for football fans alike, whether it's real life football or fantasy football. But here at TwinTakes, that means we have a ton of stuff to break down, a massive stud section that we got to go over, analyzing these performances, some of these absolutely game-breaking performances by these running backs, how sustainable that production is, what the outlook is going forward, and obviously trade deadlines today at 4 p.m. Eastern. So going to jump into that, some of the ramifications of some trades, as well as some rumors that are swirling around and how to handle those trade rumors. So with that being said, let's jump into our first headline, which has got to do with the trade. And the biggest trade so far this season is going to be Christian McCaffrey in assimilation of the 49ers offense. And we saw exactly what he could do in the upside of this man in that 49ers offense. He ran for a touchdown, threw for a touchdown, and had a pass and caught a pass for a touchdown. That hasn't been done since 2005, since LaDainian Tomlinson. Just absolutely mind-boggling, the production that Christian McCaffrey can put up. So people were a little worried with him coming into the fold last week and only putting up around 7 fantasy points. But listen, this man was studying the playbook on the flight over on Thursday night, 2 days before the game. He was running an offense that he had no idea, probably didn't know who the offensive line's names were. Probably just yelling 79, 78. So now that he's had an actual week to get acclimated to the offense, understand the playbook, have actual practice time with the rest of the team, we saw the exact upside that Christian McCaffrey can have. I will say, I don't think this 39-point performance is going to be anything that's replicable going forward. I think this is, I don't want to say an outlier, but definitely one of the better performances of the year, just because Deebo Samuel was sidelined with injury. So once Deebo gets back in the fold, there's going to be a little bit more mouths to feed. Obviously, you just paid Deebo a ton of money to be your wide receiver one. He's going to get targets. He's going to get handoffs in the backfield. So there is going to be a little bit of regression from Christian McCaffrey there once they start utilizing all their skill position players. And also from the standpoint that, listen, Kyle Shanahan is like a kid on Christmas. When you get that new toy, that's all you want to play with. You open it up and you spend the entire day with it. So now that he has Christian McCaffrey, one of the most dynamic players in the NFL, he's going out designing pass plays for him, all this other crazy stuff. And I think as teams realize, okay, we have to guard this guy. It's still Christian McCaffrey. It's going to regress a little bit more towards normalcy. You're going to see George Kittle obviously get utilized because he's a tremendous talent. You still have Brandon Ayuk. You still have Deebo. A lot of mouths to feed. So, again, this was fun. It was a great introduction to the 49ers offense. But I think Christian McCaffrey will come down to earth a little bit as that offense kind of figures out its path forward with all of its offensive weapons. And then the last thing I want to mention was that some people did have concerns coming into Christian McCaffrey making his way to the 49ers. They said that a lot of his production was utilized for being really the only mouth to feed there in Carolina. He was the really only option. He just had an insane amount of targets and caught passes on almost every single down. His opportunity share was astronomical with the amount of handoffs he was getting. And even when he wouldn't find the end zone, he was just absolutely insane for fantasy because of the amount of opportunities that he would get. And with coming to the 49ers, his opportunity would be limited. I think that this now proves that with a mad scientist in Kyle Shanahan, with a dynamic offense, Christian McCaffrey can absolutely be utilized and will be amazing for fantasy going forward. So no concerns about his value there. I think you have to be terrified if you're playing Christian McCaffrey any week going forward, regardless of the matchup. So let's jump into another running back that had an insane performance, and the best performance on the season so far is provided by Alvin Kamara with 3 touchdowns, 2 through the air and 1 on the ground. And this is amid trade rumors. Apparently the Saints have come out and said that they'd be willing to give up Kamara, especially in the wake of some of those felony allegations from the Pro Bowl last year, with a compensation package similar to what the Panthers got for Christian McCaffrey. So they definitely put him on display, definitely showed the type of utility that Alvin Kamara can provide, still being an elderly man for a running back. So we'll see if he is on the move, especially as the playoff hopes for the Saints dwindle. And I think that they would much rather have the draft capital rebuild after getting rid of their first round pick last year. But it's just absolutely insane what Kamara can do. And hopefully, for the Kamara manager's sake, that he stays with the Saints, because with Thomas's injury and Landry's injury, this obviously provides him a ton of upside and a ton of opportunity. I think, let's just take the Eagles, which is one rumor, for example. If he goes to the Eagles, you have A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, Miles Sanders is still there. Jalen Hurts is much more of a rushing threat than Andy Dalton is, so his upside would be capped. I don't think it would be a similar transitive skill set that Christian McCaffrey had going to the 49ers offense, but we just had to highlight Alvin Kamara for how insane he is, and he has the ability to put up these weeks. And I still remember his 6-touchdown week around Christmas about 2 years ago. So any team that has him has that insane production. And finally, the first time finding the end zone, just had to really swing that pendulum back the other way. Hadn't found the end zone all year this year, so of course he finds it 3 times against the Raiders. Moving on to our next one, getting away from that trade speculation. And this is something that we kind of touched on going into week 8, but it's time to get rid of your Colts. And I don't like to give trade advice. It's really hard and nuanced with everyone's team, their makeup, and say, oh, you have to trade this player, or you have to trade for this player. But I feel fairly confident that that Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, really any Colts asset should be on the trading block right now. We've seen the Colts wave the white flag. They've made that transition to Sam Ehlinger. They're not going to bring Matt Ryan back. Sam Ehlinger did not look great in his debut. He looks a little timid, a little trepidatious when throwing the ball. We saw Jonathan Taylor again leave with yet another injury, which is really uncharacteristic after he hadn't missed a practice since high school. They're losing name value, but Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor still do carry the glitz and glamour of the 101 pick and then a 3rd-round pick for Michael Pittman. But I just don't think they're going to return anywhere close to the ADP that you drafted them for. So being able to ship them off for a somewhat decent return, maybe a little bit more fantasy consistent option, I think would be in the best interest of anyone who's competing right now. I don't know how much longer I can be patient with Jonathan Taylor, especially if you drafted him at the 101. And it really pains me to say this, but I do think he's a bust. So, again, I would be avoiding Colts the same way that I have been preaching from the mountaintop to avoid the Broncos. I'm now avoiding Colts assets all over the place. It's been truly one of the most disappointing years in Colts history. And that's saying a lot, because they've had a lot of disappointing years. And then finally, let's just generally talk about trade topics and how we handle the rumors. Again, it's really how you like to play. There's a ton of inherent risk involved. Like, let's say you're a Cam Akers manager, a Kareem Hunt manager, an Alvin Kamara manager. Yeah, you can hold them, but it's hard for you play them without any certainty knowing where they're going to be. You could get swinging one way with Alvin Kamara just being absolutely utilized before the Saints ship him off, or it could be the other way with Cam Akers being held out and not being utilized, or the same way James Robinson, when the Jags knew they were going to trade him, they held him out prior to trading him the day after the game. So it does breed a little bit of inconsistency and a little bit of uncertainty about whether to start them, but hopefully as of 4 p.m. tonight, you understand. But this also provides you an opportunity. If you are a struggling manager, you can go ahead and probably trade low for a Kareem Hunt, trade low for a Cam Akers, because those managers probably have had enough of their BS. So if you need a boost to your team, right now Kareem Hunt is rumored to go to the Dolphins, where he would immediately slot in as the RB1. Definitely a buy low candidate prior to a deal getting done, or prior to even after the deal gets done, you still don't know how he utilizes the offense, especially like for Dolphins example, you still have Waddle and Tyreek as the 2 main options. So I don't think his upside is truly like RB1 game breaking when he goes to the Dolphins. So before he does any sort of production on Sunday, you could probably try to trade for him. Again, had a little bit of a bargain. So it's just really how you want to play, but it's great to kind of switch up some of the fantasy players, switch up how you view players. And for those of you who are struggling, who maybe be at the 4-4, the 3-5, I would advise you to go try to trade low, to buy low on some of these candidates. And again, in order to win fantasy, you have to take risks. This is why in the draft season I advocated taking for younger guys, taking a Waddle over Deontay Johnson, not going for Terry McLaurin, not going for these guys that have safe floors, because safe floors don't win you fantasy championships. The guys that have their breakout seasons, the guys that go off for 30 points a game will win you those fantasy championships. So again, you got to take some risks, and sometimes they pay off and sometimes they don't, but just standing pat and going with your floor of your Deontay Johnson 11 points every week, unfortunately, in my opinion, will not win you a fantasy championship. So I know it's a little long-winded about trade rumors, but let's get into one of the most diverse and deep stud sections so far on this channel. Just a reminder, we're not doing my guys because I will be covering 6, 7, or 8 teams every week for Sleeper. I will post that on the week preview, so you can go onto the Sleeper app and check out a ton of player projections over on that platform. Again, it's going to be much more comprehensive than the My Guys section. So if you're looking for that, I will be discussing that more in the Week 9 preview. But let's get back into our stud section. And Tony Pollard, oh my goodness, 33.2 fantasy points. Absolutely tremendous game on the ground for him. Don't get me wrong, he had a fairly great matchup against the Chicago Bears, but also this is what he can do without Zeke Elliott and without the perceived insistence of Jerry Jones on the $100 million man. We've known for a while that Tony Pollard is the more explosive running back, the better running back, and we saw just what Tony Pollard can do when Zeke's not taking and vulturing all his touches. Someone needs to tell Jerry that, listen, Zeke is past his prime. He's great. He make him your mascot. You know, he is a character. He has that certain ostentatious aura about him. He can go out. He can do. Him and Michael Irvin can go out and do pressers for you guys. But this is the guy that should be taking the bulk of your snaps out of the backfield. The guy that should be running your offense. The guy that should be taking passes from Dak. The guy that can go off and explode for a 25, 40-yard run and bring a new dynamic to your offense. And Tony Pollard needs to be involved. He is one of those RB2s, quote unquote, because in my opinion, he's the RB1. But he's one of those RB2s that you can start week in, week out, whether the RB1 is on the field or not, and still feel very confident about his upside. Moving on to the best performance from a running back this week, it's going to be Alvin Kamara, 38.3 points. We talked about how insane his performance was. 3 touchdowns, 2 on the air, 1 on the ground. Again, without Thomas, without Landry, Chris Olave was there and performing well, but you know, Alvin Kamara just provides that. He's a cheat code for fantasy because of the way that he isn't the best pure runner, but he is one of the best pass catchers in the league at the running back position, so he does it all. And again, as long as Thomas continues to stay out with that toe injury and Landry can't solidify his way back to the field, the opportunity share for Alvin Kamara will be absolutely massive. Obviously, you have Taysom Hill that can potentially vulture touchdowns. Chris Olave through the air is also a good asset. But dude, Alvin Kamara is just very, very special. Number 3, Christian McCaffrey. I talked about him in the headline as well. 3 touchdowns, 1 through the air, 1 on the ground, and 1 passing. Again, we're going to see new heights of what Christian McCaffrey can do when he's actually in a competent offense with a great play caller rather than someone who's using crayons to draw up their plays. Cough, cough, Matt Rule. But truly a special talent in the NFL, and this 49ers team looks very, very scary. A.J. Brown, wow, a lot of these guys have... This is a lot of 3 touchdown guys. A.J. Brown, 156 yards through the air and 3 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts was feeding him early and often against Pittsburgh Steelers, who are 32nd ranked against the pass. So no surprise there that he was absolutely being eviscerated by a guy who's making candidate for himself as a top 5 wide receiver in the league. Has truly been a massive boon to the Eagles' performance. And I expect a lot more of this to come, as the Eagles just look like a very fun team, and they look like they can, they'll take whatever the defense gives you. If they want to pass it on them, great. Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown will take care of you. You want to run it on them? Cool. You have Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, and Kenneth Gainwell. Oh, and then Dallas Goedert's going to be in there as well. So this is a team that is really, really scary from just how many ways they can go ahead and attack you. And finally, the last stud that we want to mention and highlight here, another 30-point performance, Derrick Henry, over 200 yards. This dude owns the Houston Texans, 213 yards with 2 touchdowns. This dude was absolute monster. Obviously, it helped that Ryan Tannehill is out, and there's not really that much confidence in Malik Willis yet. So, I mean, you basically should have just direct snapped the ball to Henry most of the time. I mean, you could have put Henry at quarterback, probably would have ended up in the same results. I mean, the Texans are the 30th ranked run defense, so this was absolutely a smash game for Henry. He's had 4 games of over 200 yards against the Houston Texans, so there's also a historical precedent for this. It's just terrifying, and Derrick Henry is truly a man among boys when it comes to the running back position, and there's very, very few running backs out there like him. So some honorable mentions, we talked about Jalen Hurts and how he absolutely eviscerated the Pittsburgh Steelers. 28.4, again, another amazing performance from Jalen Hurts. We might have to retire him from this section because there's only so much I can say about Jalen Hurts is good at the football. Dalvin Cook, an excellent matchup against the Arizona Cardinals for him. He found the end zone and was also heavily utilized in the pass game as well. 22.6 points. He's really coming into his own after a little bit of a shaky start, but the Vikings continue to push forward at 6-1. They're outperforming their expectations, and Kevin O'Connell is doing a great job with that offense. So I'm still very happy for Dalvin Cook's performance, and he's living up to a round 1 selection. Jamal Williams, really interesting guy to talk about, finishes with 21.1 fantasy points, despite only being on the field for 37% of snaps, and that's because he is their goal line back. Within the 5-yard line, Jamal Williams has taken over 90% of the goal line snaps. As you saw in this game, he got 2 touchdowns, and that's where a bulk of his fantasy production comes from. Even with DeAndre Swift back on the field, Jamal Williams is a viable RB2 start every single week. So a guy that if you picked him up as a handcuff, he's no longer a handcuff. He is going to be a flexor RB2 for you going forward, just based on how dynamic that offense is. We saw Amon-Ra come back. We saw DeAndre Swift come back, and they now return to a very high-scoring team despite the loss. So Jamal Williams is a guy that I really like going forward. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, we're going to group them together here. Waddle had 26.6, Tyreek had 25.5. Mike McDaniels is just a genius as long as Tua isn't having his head ripped into the ground. And with a competent quarterback throwing them the ball, they're super, super dynamic. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are both top 5 wide receivers on the year in yards. And Jalen Waddle also found the end zone twice. So they got away from the run a little bit, but that's okay. It's very similar to the Bengals style offense where you don't really need the run. You can have a pass or a game script that's pass heavy, and when you have so many special weapons like Waddle and Tyreek, then you can definitely get away with that. And before the season we were talking about these guys, it's like, which one's going to bust, which one's going to be the better wide receiver 1? Well, guess what, they're both wide receiver 1s. Neither one of them is going to bust. You should be happy having either one of them on your team. Moving into DeAndre Hopkins, and this is a guy that I think is really, really special. Now the Cardinals love having him back. He is the leader of that team. It's not Cliff. It's not Kyler. He comes in and he brings some sort of he brings a level of confidence, a level of calm to this offense, and I think that having him back is really elevating this team. So he finished with 27.9 points, wide receiver 2 behind AJ Brown. And absolutely going to be a dominant fantasy force going forward, despite being into his 30s. Deontay Foreman, despite having a 30-point game, doesn't even crack the top 5 this week. Finishes with 3 touchdowns on the ground, 31.8, just taking advantage of Chuba Hubbard's absence. Christian McCaffrey traded away and versus the Atlanta Falcons. He should be, obviously, I don't expect him to have 31.8 fantasy points every single game, but he's obviously a great fantasy option going forward and one of those waiver wire warriors that you pick up, and he should be a great start going forward. DJ Moore, also from the Panthers, obviously 24.5 points, boosted by that 67-yard Hail Mary pass from PJ Walker. But, with PJ stinging him the ball, this guy goes from a massive bust candidate to a guy that you're like, wow, okay, cool. This is why we drafted him in the top 4 rounds. I'm very excited for DJ Moore's production going forward, and I think this is sustainable. Tua Tagovailoa could be one on the week with 29.2 points. Again, just absolutely fantastic. Travis Etienne, 23.7 points. Without James Robinson there, he's the bona fide RB1. Not only is he the bona fide RB1, but he is the best skill position player on that team. Trevor Lawrence looks to him quite a bit in the offense and expect him to be heavily utilized going forward. Travis Etienne managers are rejoicing. This is your patience has paid off. He's going to be a league winner for most people. Got to mention Kyle Pitts, despite only having 16.5 points, found the end zone. Finally, Marcus Mariota realized that he can throw the ball more than 10 times. Kyle Pitts was pretty dominant, and we saw what happens when Arthur Smith moves him out from just being a left tackle and had a pretty solid game. 16.5 points from the tight end position. You're definitely not upset about that. Ramondre Stevenson, even with Damian Harris back in the fold, he is taken over as the RB1 for the Patriots. So at this point, Damian Harris is basically a drop candidate. I wouldn't worry about him too much. Ramondre Stevenson is a bona fide RB2 going forward. 17.8 points actually makes him pretty spicy at the RB position, and anyone who picked him up cheap is very, very happy. Brandon Ayuk, 17.1 points, was a great game from the wide receiver position, despite having most of the focus beyond Christian McCaffrey. Still shows you how dynamic that 49ers offense is with a lot of those options. I don't know if how sustainable that is, but we'll see going forward, especially with Debo coming back. Antonio Gibson found the end zone through the air. I think Taylor Heineke, we've seen him in the past have a good rapport with Antonio Gibson. He is a borderline flex candidate, but I expect this to be one of the higher games he has with 17.2 points. Rondale Moore really confuses me. He had 19.9 points, had a great wide receiver week this week. And again, it was a good matchup against the Vikings. But he is just way too inconsistent for me as a fantasy asset right now. Tyler Conklin was really the only offensive weapon doing anything for the Jets this week. Finishes with 22.9 points. Stephon Diggs is just really good at football. He is the wide receiver 1 for fantasy on the year so far, and the wide receiver 2 for the NFL in yards after Tyreek Hill. He is just so good and just giving you essentially 20 points per week. And anyone who picked him up at the end of the first round, this is the guy that's going to be one of the league winners. And finally, we have Aaron Jones. Very, very happy to have him finally included on this list. 17.7 points, nothing too game-breaking or nothing to write home about, but this is against one of the best defensive lines in the NFL, again, going against the Bills with Boogie Basham, Ed Oliver, and Von Miller. So that gives you a lot of confidence in Aaron Jones going forward. It seems that Matt LaFleur has finally understood that the strength of this offense, with a lot of the wide receivers out and a lot of the wide receivers are young and struggling with mental mistakes, that they really do have to lean into their best offensive weapon, which is Aaron Jones. And if you can do that against the 6th-ranked run defense, then I have a lot of confidence in him going forward. So Aaron Jones, getting that done, getting 17.7 points without even finding the end zone, has a lot of confidence for me going forward. And this is what we were anticipating when we talked about him as a league winner prior to the start of the season, is the fact that he's going to be not only the best running back on that team, but the best pass catcher as well. And he certainly is living up to that. So ton of studs we got through. Hopefully gave you outlook of whether that's sustainable, some guys to maybe trade for, some guys that, don't get fooled by the facade of one good week. But now we got to talk about the duds. And of course, we can't do this section without talking about Davante Adams and basically the Raiders as a whole, because we'll talk about Josh Jacobs here in a little bit. But let's just talk about both right now. Josh Jacobs, 6 points. Davante Adams, 0.7 points. I don't know what happened to the Raiders. They completely lost themselves. Josh Jacobs had 3 straight games with over 30 fantasy points, and something happened. I mean, I watched the game. I just don't know what happened. They just completely fell apart. Davante Adams only had 1 catch. They just seemed completely lost against a Saints defense that actually isn't even that good. So we thought this was a team that was going to be surging. We highlighted them as one of the games of the week. They had played a couple really good games. Davante Adams looked to be back. Josh Jacobs was being amazing and really producing on the ground. And then they go and they lay an egg like this, and an egg, like an actual goose egg. They didn't score a single point. They didn't get across the 50-yard line until I think 2 minutes left in the third quarter. This is very, very concerning for the Raiders going forward. And I think this is probably the final nail in the coffin for their playoff hopes this year. And once you lose confidence in the playoffs, they don't really have much to play for. It seems like there's an air of defeat going around the players. And when you're unmotivated, it typically doesn't result in NFL points and fantasy points. So a little bit of concern surrounding my fellow managers with Raiders assets. Cortland Sutton, only 1.8 fantasy points. Can't say I'm surprised. I just don't like what the Broncos are doing. Nathaniel Hackett continues to be incompetent as a play caller. It seems like Russ has developed a little bit more of a rapport with Jerry Jeudy. Greg Dulcich is emerging as the tight end 1 over there, and that just means Cortland Sutton continues to fall by the wayside, and with a very, very, very limited offensive pie that Russell Wilson provides you, if you're not getting at least a third of the opportunities in that offense, it's probably not worth starting. Very concerned for Cortland Sutton going forward. Rashad Bateman gave you a goose egg. He left the game early with injury, but I really want to discuss that he's now suffered another foot injury and should be out for 2 to 3 weeks. This is really concerning for Rashad Bateman just because he missed a lot of his rookie year with an injury. He hasn't managed to really stay healthy at all this year. Not sure. He was super high. I was super high on him coming in this year, but I don't really know what to do with him. If he can't stay healthy and the injury bug just keeps to follow him, he's going to be one of those players that's going to be labeled as injury prone, and hopefully he can shed that soon and come back this season, but it's not something that I have confidence in going forward. And finally, Jonathan Taylor, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but not only have the Colts wave the white flag, not only have they basically said we're not going to go for the playoffs this year, not only have they said that this project has failed, we're going to start Sam Ehlinger, we're done with Matt Ryan, but he once again exited with yet another injury. So he's another guy that's been continually bit by the injury bug, looking like a bust at the 101 position, unfortunately. And I think this is the time where you sell him and you get 50 cents on the dollar if you're lucky. But 50 cents is better than nothing, which I think is the way he's trending in this current Colts offense with being so injury prone, because there's only so much he can take before the Colts will probably just say, hey, we're shutting him down for the season. So some honorable mentions: Deontay Johnson with only 6 points. This Pittsburgh offense is insanely concerning. Nothing's being done. Whether you start Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, none of them can seem to get it done. This is going to be Mike Tomlin's first season going under 500, most likely. And they just extended him. They have him as a part of the plan for the future, but he's just doesn't provide the touchdown upside. He doesn't provide that game-breaking upside, and you're not going to win starting Deontay Johnson week in and week out. The New York Jets running backs, not that I could say that this is totally surprising. J-Rob only had 1.7 points, and Carter had 8.1 points. It seems like Bill Belichick is their kryptonite. Bill Belichick and the Patriots do have a really good run defense. I'm not going to take too much stock in this, but I am going to continue to pay attention to the Jets and see who emerges as the RB1 there. Obviously, J-Rob has only been there for a couple days, so it's still taking him some time to get acclimated to the offense and see. We saw how good Breece Hall was and how much they loved running the ball with him. So I'm very excited to see which one of these guys steps up. So a little bit disappointing this week, but something to pay attention to going forward. Drake London, 5.1 points, continues to be disappointing for fantasy. And this is not to say that I don't like Drake London as a prospect. He is tremendous, but I like him a lot more in Dynasty when he actually has a quarterback that will throw the ball more than 10 times a game. Granted that Marcus Mariota did throw the ball more than 10 times a game, but he only had 16 completions this game. And again, you need to have a very, very large opportunity share in order to make the most of that sort of pie that's being given to you by Marcus Mariota. So my prospects for Drake London, I'm very down on him. You can't drop him. He's not a droppable asset, but I can't see myself starting him for the rest of the season until something materially changes in that Falcons offense, which I don't see that happening as Arthur Smith just loves to run the ball. Elijah Moore, goose egg. He hates life there. Watching his post-game interview was absolutely hysterical. He just has no rapport with Zach Wilson. And this is a guy that I was high on coming into the season this year. He probably is a good trade candidate. I would not be surprised if they moved him before the trade deadline. But Elijah Moore, he's droppable. They're a run-first team. Zach Wilson looks incompetent back there. He's throwing a lot of picks, and he didn't get a single target this past week. And obviously Elijah Moore is very frustrated, and a frustrated player doesn't play well on Sundays. Christian Kirk, 5.5 points, not particularly great. Again, this was a hard matchup for him, but also he's taking a backseat in the pass catching to Travis Etienne. I think Christian Kirk's not going to give you any game-breaking weeks, but he will provide you a good floor as a wide receiver for this year. I'm not very high on his dynasty prospects, as I assume that in order for Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars to be successful, they will have to go out and draft a high-end wide receiver, maybe like a Jordan Addison or a Jackson Smith-Njigba next year. Wan'Dale Robinson, so much hype and only finishes up with 2.5 points. The passing game, we talked about this. Going into this week, that the way the Seahawks are the way the Seahawks are constructed, they're really good against the pass. Tariq Woolen's leading their DB room right now, and it really fits into what the Giants want to do, which is run the ball with Saquon and Daniel Jones. Wan'Dale Robinson, we knew was not going to get a ton of action this week. Doesn't mean that I'm not high on him as a good prospect, especially with Kadarius Toney getting traded. He's certainly the wide receiver one going forward for the New York Giants, and he should absolutely be stashed on a waiver wire or a trade low target after this 2.5 performance. Chris Olave, 7.7 points. I still love what he brings to the table. It's just the fact that Alvin Kamara took over this game. And the fact that Chris Olave got 7.7 points, I would honestly be happy with that. Again, a guy that trying to trade for going down the stretch. I think he will be a league winner for a lot of people. Benjamin, 6.5 points. Obviously very disappointing against the Vikings. DeAndre Hopkins is now the focal point of that offense, and we thought just expected just a bad performance. I don't know really what to say. He had the opportunity there. He had runs. He just wasn't efficient on the ground. Tyler Higbee, 2.5 points. We saw Allen Robinson make a little bit of a resurgence back into this offense, but overall, the Rams offense just looks completely lost and incompetent, nowhere close to what they were last season. So Tyler Higbee continues to be at the product of Matthew Stafford and not being able to really throw the ball and find a lot more targets outside of Cooper Kupp. We'll see if he gets involved a little bit more as Cooper Kupp makes his way off the field late in the game with an ankle injury. So if he misses some time, Tyler Higbee continues to be good. But right now, it's hard for me to see him as a consistent starting tight end one. Mark Andrews, on the other hand, is absolutely a tight end one, but this is very, very frustrating as he continues to deal with injuries this year. Came in with a hip injury, left the game early with a shoulder injury. Harbaugh says it doesn't look long-term, but it doesn't look anything serious, doesn't look long-term, but this is incredibly concerning from the standpoint that he can't stay healthy, and this is the third week that he's been questionable going into it. Again, something to monitor, as the passing game is important for Lamar to really open up the running channels for the Ravens to be successful, and Mark Andrews is their tight end one and their wide receiver one. So if he is out, kind of a downgrade to the entire Ravens offense, but hopefully he can get back because he is a very crucial component to that offense up there in Baltimore. Devontae Smith, 4.8 points. You had to start him. The matchup was just way too good, but we knew this coming in, that there's just too many mouths to feed, whether it's Sanders, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, yada, yada, yada. And then Devontae Smith just got the short end of the stick this week as A.J. Brown absolutely took over that game, 4.8 points. I'm still very high on Devontae Smith. I still think he's a great asset. Take it in stride, live to fight another day. And finally, the last that we got to talk about is George Pickens. Hit on how putrid the Steelers offense is with Deontay Johnson, but George Pickens absolutely goosed you. Very frustrating to see. Even with Kenny Pickett throwing him the ball, you like to see that Pickett to Pickens connections. So I'm surprised that he goosed, but at this point with Matt Canada running the offense and just going up against an absolute buzzsaw in the Philadelphia Eagles, it seems like the outlook for the Steelers is very, very poor for the rest of the season. He was a sleeper on a lot of people's teams. I'll just go on this little tangent about George Pickens, that he was a sleeper, that he would break out, and he's tremendously talented. He is so freaking talented. He doesn't have the quarterback to get him there. The offensive line isn't getting the quarterback enough time. Najee Harris is not doing well at all and not opening up, not allowing pressure coming to the box, not drawing any attention. So now more safeties and linebackers are falling back into coverage, which obviously is detrimental to George Pickens. So a good stash. If Chase Claypool is traded, his value goes up. But at this point, all of the assets for the Steelers, I think, are stock down type of guys. So let's jump into our waivers really quickly to wrap up week 8. Number 1, Justin Fields. I know this looks like I've been chasing points, but we like to here at TwinTakes judge this based on not only past performance, but the schedule coming forward. And Justin Fields has a very, very juicy schedule coming forward, especially when it comes to rushing defenses. So we're looking at Miami next, then Detroit, then Atlanta, then the Jets, and then Green Bay. Definitely with a lot of these buys coming up, especially from the Lamar Jackson managers, Justin Fields should be the number 1 target on the waiver wire and should have tremendous games against these putrid rushing defenses. Number 2, surprisingly, a lot of people will be Terrace Marshall Jr. From the Panthers. Without Christian McCaffrey or Robbie Anderson, the target's got to go somewhere, and Terrace Marshall found himself as the deep threat alongside DJ Moore. He had 9 targets this past game, and I think PJ Walker should be the starting quarterback going forward. I think he has the best arm out of that quarterback room. And as long as PJ Walker is throwing the ball and giving Terrace Marshall Jr. 9 targets, I think he is a deep flex start and could see a massively increased production role in this offense. Moving on to number 3 is going to be Isaiah Likely. And this is going to be a direct product of the injuries to Mark Andrews and Bateman. He was heavily utilized in the offense Thursday night against the Buccaneers after Andrews and Bateman left. And he will have to be utilized if the Ravens want to be successful. The Ravens just can't run the ball, like run, and expect to be successful. They have to have the pass game going in order to open up the run game, and also for Lamar Jackson to keep the defense honest. Isaiah Likely looked tremendous, the rookie out of Coastal Carolina. He lines up in the Y position a lot. He's not truly a blocking tight end. He is more of a pass catching option, lines up more like a wide receiver would line up. So if the injuries continue to plague that wide receiving core, I think Isaiah Likely will be a great option going forward in the Ravens offense, especially given their proclivity to run two tight end sets with Mark Andrews. Number 4, another tight end that I really like is going to be Evan Ingram. In this desolate tight end landscape, Ingram he's showing consistent production. He has 93% snap share. He's on the field for 93% of snaps. He has 6 targets. He finds the end zone. He's not dropping the ball like he did in New York. And with Christian Kirk not playing up to his performance and no other real skill position players, now that James Robinson's traded, Evan Ingram finds himself finding it as a large part of that opportunity share in the Jaguars backfield. If you're struggling with tight end, just pick him up or buy him low, and he's just going to be consistent week in and week out option that you can start and just forget about. Last guy is more of a stash option, and that's going to be Rachaad White. He looked really, really good on Thursday, despite only putting up 5 fantasy points. The way he ran after coming in late in the game for Leonard Fournette, he just looked a lot more explosive, a lot more dynamic, had a lot better vision than Leonard Fournette, and I think that as the season progresses, he could be earning a much larger snap share. Leonard Fournette continues to struggle on the ground. Yes, his value is in the pass game, and he continues to be dominant, catching those dump offs from Tom Brady. But they do need to really, if they want to continue to make a push for the playoffs and make any sort of noise later on in the season, they will need to have some sort of established running game. And right now, in my opinion, just based on the eye test, Rachaad White is a much better runner than Leonard Fournette. So picking him up, if you have a spot in your bench, stashing him could be a very fruitful move later on down for your fantasy championship. So that wraps up our waivers. Just recapping of Justin Fields, Terrace Marshall Jr., Isaiah Likely, Evan Ingram, Rachaad White. Boy, these waivers are slim this week. But, definitely some deep sleepers that I think you could add to your bench and provide value. So that's going to wrap up the Week 8 recap. I hope you guys enjoyed all the scoring that came back to fantasy. Hope you guys had some tremendous weeks, a lot of blowout wins, and I will come back in a couple days to preview for Week 9. And we're going to highlight the first segment that we have on Sleeper this week. And so go catch me there, and look forward to seeing you guys later.